parents' names?
Isaac and Fanny
Potash.
And my mother's father was the head rabbi in their town, in Truckenbrod. And I don't know how many times he had to get married. I mean, because my father had half-sisters. And my father was born there as well. And when he was, I think, 15, because I already said he'd get married when he was 12, but I'm kidding.
Who knows?
But when he was 15, and the Russian soldiers would come through and they'd take all the Jewish kids. And once they went into the Russian army, they never came out. So he ran away. And I don't know where he hid, but he was gone for quite a while. And when he came back, and he married my mother's sister, and they had 3 daughters. And then a terrible sickness hit the village, and my mother's sister died, and 2 of the children. My older sister, it was really my half-sister, because my father married my mother to keep the child in the family. And then when they decided, the only stories they ever really told, when they decided to come to America, they landed in London, and they were there for a whole year before they could get passage to come to America. And my mother used to say, the place was so terrible, the conditions were so awful. They had next to no food. It was terrible. Then they came over on, steerage, and my sister Edie was 7 months old, and my mother was pregnant with my sister Molly. And so when they came to America, there were 2 sisters were not citizens until my parents became citizens. And then my sister was born here, and so was I. All the people who were here from Truckenbrod usually went to the Middle Harrison Street shul. And so it was one big happy family, I guess.
So in terms of going back to your parents,
yeah.
What did your father do for work?
Well, when they got to America, he had to look for a job, of course. And he got a job as a roofer for Cutler Roofing, who hired so many of the refugees that came. He never did roofing in his life, but he said he was a roofer, and he did that. And they moved in with my aunt, my father's sister, who already had 1, 2, 3, probably 5 kids. And it was a 6-room apartment on Providence Street. And my mother, my father, my 2 sisters, 3 sisters at that time, all lived in one room. And my mother cried and said, if we just had enough money, we could find an apartment and leave. Because I'm sure my aunt didn't like it either. It had to be terrible. Anyway, my father was walking down the street one day, and there was a wallet right at the curb. He was coming back from work. He picked it up, and there was $60 in it, and no identification. He said, God must have sent it, because they moved out and went into an apartment on Harrison Street.
Father was a roofer, and then he ultimately bought a grocery store.
When I was 4, we lived on Harrison Street. We moved to Hamilton Street because my father bought a little grocery store where he had for probably 20 years, full grocery store.
Sure.
Candy, ice cream, meats, I mean, it was everything.
And it was all mixed together.
During the war with the food stamps, and if you saved the fat from the meat, and you rendered it, and you sold it for soap. They bought that. That's how they made soap. So in the back of the store was a pot-bellied stove, and my mother had a big tub, and she would put the fat in, but she would throw an onion in it. So people would know how good that smells. You have to know the onion, and they'd come in and say, oh my God, Mrs. Potash, what are you cooking? It was, garbage.
It smelled great.
It did smell wonderful. We stayed there until I was 15, and then my parents bought a house on the west side, which was, of course, the best place to be. But little by little, the Jews from the east side were drifting away. My life in that neighborhood, different than my friends, because they all lived in Providence Street and Waverly Street in that area. So I always had to get on the trolley car and come to them, but they were very kind in letting me stay over, and it was great. We had a very close group of friends. Saturday nights, I was 14, and how my parents let me go by myself, I don't know. But anyway, they had the dances at the big Providence Street shul. And my girlfriends and I would get together, and we'd go down Water Street and go to Weintraub's or Slinimsky and Ritz, either one. And for a nickel, you got a hot dog, and then another nickel, you got a bag of chips. And it was probably a nickel for a can of soda or a glass of soda. And then we would go to the shul, and we'd have to look in there first to see who was there, because there weren't any nice guys there. We were going to go in. And I don't remember what we paid to go in. It might have been a quarter, but that sounds like a lot, so I'm not sure. But they had a jukebox, and the music was wonderful. Whenever I hear the same old songs, I think of those days. Sure. And it's funny, one of my girlfriends wore very, like they call them, Coke bottle lenses. She really had low vision. She'd take them off when we went in, and someone would ask her to dance, and then she'd come back and she'd say, "Who'd I dance with?" And so we always got a kick out of that.
People visit you from the east side on the west side?
You know, this is really funny, because my oldest sister had already moved to June Street, and they bought a house. And then when my father thought it was time we moved, he bought the house next door.
Oh.
And then when my other sister got married, the third house was next door. So we were 3 houses in a row. And we lived upstairs when I got married in my father's 2-family house. So they were going to change the name of the street to Potash Ave. But it was wonderful, because our kids all grew up together. You know, we'd all sit in my father's yard, which was the larger part, right in the middle. And the kids all just grew up together, and the cousins were so close. And now, of course, they're spread all over the place. And people today don't really know their cousins or their family, which is what we did when we were young. On a Sunday, we would go to one of my cousins or aunts or whatever. Everybody came, and they'd serve tea and cookies, and family really knew one another, which is very, very different from today. And then when we lived on Hamilton Street, and we would go to shul for the holidays, my mother and father would never ride. So that was quite a hike at night. The whole family, we all got dressed and walked from 340 Hamilton Street to the Harrison Street shul, and back again at probably 10 o'clock at night.
So aside from going to dances and stuff, were you in Sunday school? Were you involved with any other type of social groups?
Yes, I belonged to Young Israel, which was pretty prevalent at that time, and that's how I met my husband. I was 14. I was 14, and there was a convention in Boston, and why my parents let me go, I don't know, but they did, and I met my husband-to-be, who lived in Boston. So I've known him since I was 14, he was 16. And at 17, he didn't even wait to graduate. He went into the Marine Corps, and he was in the Pacific for 3 years. Came home on my 18th birthday, we got engaged.
Wow.
And I was married at 20. We would have been married 67 years when he passed away.